just created. Hi, everybody. My name is Susan, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lazare. Most of us know the lasting power and destructiveness of a personal offense. Many of us, including myself, can name a family incident that has caused rancor and distance through the decades, even generations. In a culture where much has been made of the act of forgiveness, little has been said on the subject of apology. In his new book, Dr. Aaron Lazare explores questions such as, why do people apologize? Why is it so difficult? Why do some apologies heal but others offend? Can an apology come too late? What makes some apologies shallow and manipulative, others healing and freeing? In this groundbreaking book, Dr. Lazare offers new insights into this vital yet neglected component of human relationships. Dr. Lazare is Chancellor and Dean and Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He was formerly Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and at Mass General Hospital. He has appeared on Oprah, Talk of the Nation, and many other TV and radio shows. Please welcome him here today.
Well, you will tell to be able to have a passion for the subject. I think it's so important, and so I've spoken with a little hyperbole to almost everybody in the state of Montana. They invited me. The audience is very interesting. I'm a physician. Doctors have to learn how to apologize for mistakes they made. We're not very good at that. Lawyers became interested in that. Conflict resolution classes have been asking me to speak. Interesting, hospice groups, people who are older and dying want to make peace before they die. And international groups have had the opportunity to talk to them, and so it just affects so many people. And afterwards, I can tell you how I got interested in it. But I'll talk some, and you can just interrupt me, and you can play it by ear how much I talk and how much you listen. But it's not very pedantic, because I'm a storyteller. My father, before he got married, was a stand-up comedian, had a radio show, but they had trouble getting a sponsor. And his mother said to him in Yiddish, "Das wachst a bum," translated, "You're growing up to be a bum." So he quit it, got married, and became a printer. So I inherited some of that. But so let me tell you about this apology business. I'll start with a story. I was at a social event. You can all hear me okay? I was at a social event in Worcester, and a 70-year-old man came up to me and he said, "Dr. Lazare, I have to tell you, I heard you speak months ago, and I really thought it was a good talk. And I didn't realize till months later why I thought it was good, because I realized that I had a need to apologize." He said, "When I was 10 years old, I betrayed the trust of a good friend, and we never spoke since. And it's been haunting me. I have nightmares about it. I think about it. I dream about it. I'm guilty about it, even though it took place 60 years ago." So I didn't know what to do, but I decided I didn't have the courage to walk up to him and apologize, but I knew where he lived, and so I wrote the apology. And I went to his house. The man's name was Eddie, whose house, and his name was Manuel. He gave me permission to use the names even. I went to his house. I rang the doorbell. He came to the door. He recognized me, and I said, "Eddie, would you read this?" And he read it, and then he said, his face first registered surprise, then a smile slowly spread over his face. We hugged, and he said, "I love you. I've been released from that haunting image of hurting Eddie." 2 years later, he writes me a letter, and he said, "Eddie died, but I was so glad that I apologized." The fact that I delivered the letter to Eddie before he died was important to me, because it was weighing on my mind for so long, and also I was able to see Eddie's reaction, indicating how he felt about me, one of close friendship. Had he died before I delivered the letter, I would have been denied the satisfying solution of removal of this mental burden which plagued me over these last 60 years. Very, very touching. I'll tell you a story that affects your father. This lovely gentleman, scholar, invited me to speak in Nice, France, on a subject of cancer prevention. I said, I don't know anything about cancer prevention except what I read in Time magazine. He said, well, you're a good lecturer. Just come and talk about whatever you want. I said, I'm going to talk about apology. He said, fine. So I'm the keynote speaker on a Sunday from 4:30 to 5 with 350 people there. First, they almost didn't come because they thought apology. They were apologizing for the speaker not showing up, but eventually they got it. They got the message. And so 350 people came, and I'm on from 4:30 to 5. I give the lecture. It went over well. People were they were so happy that a dozen people cornered me later on in the next few days to ask me personal questions. One Islamic lady said, my husband doesn't talk to his father, and his father lives in Los Angeles, and we live in Boston, and what should I do, and is it okay if I tape record your discussion? So it was interesting how many people struggle with these issues. But anyway, so I gave the talk, and at 5 o'clock, I'm finished. 100 people raised the hand, want to ask questions. So I turned to the moderator, who says, go on. So I spent 20 minutes answering questions back and forth, and it was great. But I didn't realize there was another speaker on at 5. And now I really felt stupid. And he's a big bear of a man who stood up, a very famous cancer researcher, walking towards the podium. So I said to the audience, we have to stop now, and I disappeared. But the next 2 days, I would pass him in the street, and he would give me a dirty look. And I didn't do anything. I said, this guy is from Nebraska. I'll never see him again. Who needs this heartache? I'm leaving town. So I did nothing. But the last night, my wife and I went to a restaurant at 7 o'clock in France. At that time, no one eats in France. They don't eat till 9 o'clock. But we are there 7 o'clock, and there are only 4 couples seated, and you can guess the rest of the story. He's there with his wife. Guess where the waiter seats us? Right next to him. I turn my chair so I don't have to look at him. And we finish first. We get up to walk out, and I get to the door with my wife, and I say to my wife, Louise, I said, Louise, wait here. There's something I have to do. So I turn around and go back, and he's sitting there looking at me. He stands up, 6'5", and I say, Dr. Smith, well, actually his name was Dr. Lynch. I said, I really feel badly about what happened the other day. I said, it was really stupid of me not to be paying attention. I hope it didn't inconvenience you. I'm awfully sorry. That was the apology. Well, from this grouchy-looking guy, he looked like he wanted to kill me, puts his hand on my shoulder, and he says, Dr. Lazare, you gave a great speech. Now, that's not the end of the story, but I'll analyze that based on all the other 2,000 apologies I've studied. To apologize to someone is to give them a gift, and most of the times the dynamic is a restoration of their dignity. So what was my offense? I treated him like he didn't matter. Your lecture is not important. I can go 20 minutes over time. That's how he would perceive it. So it was an insult or a humiliation. The apology takes it away and says, it wasn't you. It was my stupidity. It wasn't that you were insignificant. So I restore his dignity. Now he's happy. What does he do? He returns the gift. Dr. Lazare, you gave a great lecture. It's predictable. It happens like that almost all the time, that reciprocal back and forth, most of the time in my experience. So at this 60 seconds, we've accomplished it. I have a pretty good sense of humor, so I said, he's sitting with his wife, I said, I understand you're internationally famous. Now he's even happier. He said, how do you know? I said, I met your wife in the museum 2 days ago, and she told me. So now he's laughing, she's laughing, I'm laughing. Go to the door where my wife is waiting. They're taking a whole 3 minutes. And my wife is laughing. I said, what are you laughing about? She said, it was either the end of a happy sitcom, or it was like 3 estranged friends who had a reconciliation. She was pretty close. The next morning in the hotel, where does the waiter seat us in the hotel? Right next to he and his wife. This time we're buddies. It's like a friendship was started. And he's telling us where he's going. I was so excited about it, how this happens, and how good 2 people can feel, that I couldn't wait to get home to call the publisher and say, hold the presses, I got to put it in the book, which I did before I had the chance. So This is an example of these kinds of apologies. Let me go to the basics, though. What is an apology? Definition of apology is pretty simple. An apology is an acknowledgement of committing an offense and an expression of remorse. I hurt you, and I feel badly about it, and I wish it hadn't happened, or whatever. That's the fundamental definition of the apology. If you commit an offense and you're not remorseful, it doesn't mean I hurt you and I'm happy. That's not an apology, obviously. The semantics of this are very important. What's the difference between saying I apologize and I'm sorry? Is saying I'm sorry an apology? And the answer is yes and no. If I am reading the newspaper, walking down the street, irresponsible, and I bump into you and knock you over and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry, can I pick up your bundles? That's an apology. It's clear that I'm expressing an offense. I did something stupid, I was careless. On the other hand, if I said, I'm so sorry that your friend is ill, that's not an apology. That's the empathic sorry. And you'll see later on how people will use the empathic sorry to get away with apologizing when it's not really an apology. So it has its value, and it's good to be empathically sorry, but it's not an apology under certain conditions. Actually, to show you an example of that, in the Abu Ghraib situation, where the world wanted an apology from the United States for torturing and mistreating the prisoners, the president and Condoleezza Rice both said something to the effect, we're awfully sorry for what happened. But they never expressed any responsibility. So they made the empathic sorry to kind of convince people it was an apology, but it never was. Because they never said, we are at fault, we're responsible, we've got to do something about it, we'll investigate. They never said anything, they just said, we're so sorry about that. Bush went further to say, I'm even sorrier that people think so badly of Americans, like you should apologize to us. Made it even worse. And I'll tell you, a bad apology, which I'll describe for you, is worse than no apology. At least when there's no apology, you can hope one will be forthcoming. Where there's a fraudulent apology, it just makes you angry because people is treating you as if you were stupid. The apology is close to repentance. Actually, in religious people are very interested in it because if you say, what's the difference? Repentance is a turning away from evil and a returning to God or to truth. Apology are the steps towards it. And so in Christianity and Judaism, how do you repent? You make these following apologies for the things you did wrong. So they're very, very close. The difference, of course, is when you repent to God, that's different from repenting or apologizing to your fellow human beings. And Judaism is stricter. There's no forgiveness without repentance or without an apology. You also see this, by the way, in Alcoholics Anonymous in the 9th and 10th steps. You have to apologize to people you offended. Otherwise, how can you stay sober when that kind of tension is on you? The word apology is not such a good word because it has two meanings. If you look it up in a dictionary, you ever hear the word, he was an apologist for the president, or Christian apologetics? That's a different meaning. That meaning is to justify or to explain. So Christian apologetics is an explanation for a certain theology, or someone who's an apologist. Want to sit down? If you apologize, if you're an apologist for a president, you're trying to help the public understand that no harm was done. So that's different. The word was changed. That's a Greek word from apologia. In about the 1870s and 1800s, the word changed so that it has a separate meaning, the more common meaning of acknowledging an offense. Other languages really do better because any of you know German or Yiddish, and Schuldigen Schuldig means guilt, take away my guilt. The word guilt is there, so you know you're talking about an apology, whereas the word apology doesn't come from any root. Or in Latin, Spanish, or Portuguese, the word is culpa, mea culpa, des culpa. And so when someone says culpa, you know someone is saying, I'm culpable, I did something wrong, please take away my guilt. So other languages have it clearer. So just to say, if you say only I'm sorry or I apologize for a serious offense, like betraying a friend's trust, something, it's never enough. it's just too shallow. The only time an apology like that works is reasonable is if you bump into someone's shopping cart or something trivial, you say sorry or apologize, and people nod, and that's a sort of social nicety. But otherwise, I apologize is not going to be enough. It just doesn't have it. And if you commit some offense, people are going to look at you like you've missed it. Now, just this, yeah.
Excuse me, may I?
Sure.
What's the point of that apology then? For whom is it done? Who is it meant to benefit?
For a serious offense, will you say only I'm sorry? You're trying to get away with. The person who's apologizing is trying to get off easy.
So the offender is trying to relieve herself or himself of some...
Either of guilt or of not having you retaliate and get even. Well, I apologize. What else do you want? Well, most apologies, I'll tell you, are fraudulent or pseudo apologies. And I'll give you some examples so you see what they are. But by the way, apologies have grown in importance in the United States over the last 10 years, 12 years. Using LexisNexis, which some of you know about, you can look up anything you want. I was in any newspaper, any word. And if we looked up, I use the Washington Post and the New York Times because they are, I think, the most international newspapers in the country. So I had my assistants look up how many times there were articles on apology with the word apology or apologize from 1992 to 2002, year by year by year. And they doubled in frequency over that period of time, with a little blip during the Clinton's years because he apologized for a lot of things. but Clinton was, by the way, presidents only apologize, and they may even do it well. They only apologize for things the previous administration did. The last president who apologized for something he did was Abraham Lincoln, and the second inaugural, which I'm sure you have in one of your books, was really an apology for slavery. It was very profound. He said, "What was this war really about? It was about slavery." And what was the offense? The offense was that slavery is a sin because it's a sin to earn your bread from the sweat of another man's face. And what is the reparation for that? He said, maybe God has deemed it, has willed it, that all the blood that was shed from the lash for 250 years will be shed by the sword before this war can be over. Pretty grim. And who profited from this war? The North and the South. Money. It was all about money. And then after all that blood and gore, he says, the part that all of us remember, with malice toward none and charity for all. Now we must bind up the wounds and heal and take care of the soldier in battle, the infant, the widow, etc. Unfortunately, he was killed 7 weeks later, and so he was not there to provide the reparation, which would have been the healing of the wounds, if the wounds still aren't healed. But no presidents apologized for what they did. Clinton made profound apologies for the Tuskegee experiment, in which African Americans were not treated for syphilis. They were just watched while they got sick and died. First President Bush apologized for a good apology for the Japanese American internment during World War II. So it's hard for our national leaders to apologize on the spot for what they did. It's sex related, of course. Who apologizes more, men or women? Absolutely, women apologize, and the sociologists who write about it say women are more interested in restoring relationships. Men are more interested in who's right and who's wrong. Now, I'm sure you're different and I'm different. But it's a generality that women, I think, no one writes about this. Women sometimes apologize too much. They'll apologize when they didn't even do anything wrong, and some of them really object to that in themselves. I've had some women come up to me after the lecture and say, "How can I stop? It makes me sick that I keep on apologizing." And a couple of women who looked really psychologically battered told me in private conference after a lecture was over that they had been abused by their parents, and it was a way of saying, Daddy, I'm sorry, don't hit me. So it was a sad situation. The other reason, hypothesis why women apologize more may be if men are stronger physically at the age of 3 or 4 or 5, women have to be smarter, right, to figure out how to heal this thing. Where men can just, little boys can really push people over. Whatever it is, there is a difference. Of course, there are differences in cultures. I was talking yesterday to someone born in Israel. He said, "We just don't do that. We don't apologize." I'm trying to figure out what the dynamics was. Was it the Holocaust, or was it living in a country where you weren't here with the Japanese? A lot of people in a small place apologize profusely, but only to each other, not to foreigners. So so whatever you learn about apologies really has to do with the United States and Western Europe, and really doesn't. Why the apologies increase in importance? What's going on? I think of all the reasons, the most dominant reason is that the world has become a global village. We are all neighbors. If there's a rusting nuclear submarine in Russia, everyone is worried about it. If there's an oil spill, it's a lot of oil. If we spill it on Canada, or Canada spills it on us, there's a lot of concern. We're a global village. We depend on each other all the time, and everybody knows everything about everybody now. What happened in Abu Ghraib, humiliating prisoners, I'll tell you, we've always humiliated prisoners. The difference was the digital camera and the internet. The next day, the whole world knew. Another example of that, there was a not too swift state senator in North Carolina who decided he would inform everybody about his great beliefs. So he wrote to all the people in the legislature one Friday night, what made America great was white Christian men. Well, not everybody was white who was in the legislature, not everybody was men, not everybody was Christian. He was in big trouble. Again, the internet. When I was a young man, you wouldn't have the email. Email gets you in trouble. I run a cottage industry at the medical school of people who send dumb emails and then come and say, how do I apologize? Because if they're really you ever been angry at somebody, when you write something, a letter or email, you think it's brilliant. When you write something when you're angry, you think it's brilliant, and then 3 days later you say, oh my God, what have I done? Well, when I was earlier on in my career, you'd have a secretary, and 3 days later I go to my secretary and say, Jan, did you mail that? And she said, of course not. That's my job, to keep you from looking stupid. But so all these things happen, and also when I was a kid in high school, there were 2 billion people on Earth. There were 6 billion people. A lot of people on Earth, nuclear weapons, all this stuff is going on. And so apologies is one way to prevent going to war or going to battle. By the way, what was the cure? What was the way when there was a duel? How did the duel stop and not someone would have to apologize? I'm studying, I have 2 books on dueling now, but that's what dueling was about. You offended my honor, we have to go to do battle, choose your weapons, and if I was the one who offended you, if I apologized, that would be the end of it. Apologies actually started having more effect internationally at the end of World War II. Germany and France went to war in 1870. They beat each other up. The Germans won and humiliated the French. They took over Alsace-Lorraine. Then World War I, the French won. They took back Alsace-Lorraine, humiliated the Germans with the Versailles Treaty, and Hitler made his career out of shame and humiliation. We have to rise again, be a great power, and so they went through World War II. After World War II, both countries said this has to stop. They have not gone to war for a long time, and there's no belief that they ever would in the foreseeable future. Nuclear weapons in these wars have sobered people, and actually the first profound apologies had to do with the Holocaust. The Pope John the 23rd, in about 1963, he was very moved by all that happened, and the Holocaust was a public thing. It wasn't something that was hidden. The German citizens of of the surrounding villages by the concentration camps were forced by the American generals to walk through the camps and pick up the bodies. So people knew what happened. At the end of World War I, there was no fighting in German territory. The fighting was all in France for the most part. And Germany couldn't understand how they lost the war when there was no battle on the ground. So what did Pope John do? First he said this liturgy is anti-Semitic. We have to stop it. They were about the perfidious Jews. And then he launched Vatican II, in which he had died by the time it started, but there's some profound statements about how the church has treated people of Islam, Judaism, and the rest of the world. Can't do this anymore. So this was a big change that happened, and it was all related to World War II. And after that, the measure of a country's morality and stature as a nation of morals depended on whether they were willing to apologize. And so you have a lot of international apologies that have occurred over the years. The United States, a major one was the Japanese American who were interned during the war. We apologized sometime in the 1980s. On the 40th anniversary of World War II, Weizsäcker, who was the president of Germany, made a speech to the Bundestag, their equivalent of Congress, for an hour, in which he acknowledged everything wrong that Germany did during the war. You read this and you can't believe it. It was considered one of the great speeches of the century. He listed. This was an hour-long speech, so it's a 20-page document, and the theme that comes through it: the greatest gift we can give to our children is never to forget. You can only ask forgiveness by remembering. So a lot of important things happen. So you can't count interpersonal apologies, but I think they're going on all the time. So let me get to the apology process itself. I've analyzed, I said, between 1,000 and 2,000 apologies over the last 10 years, and you can see that an apology has 4 parts. This is the structure of apology, and they don't have to all be there. In fact, there could be even some silent apologies. When you're driving a car and you put your foot on the gas, and there's a pedestrian who just gets out of the way, and you make some kind of gestures that acknowledges that it was you. Some people think when the current Pope, went to visit the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, that without a word, that was in effect an apology, just him going there for what it symbolized. But there's the 4 parts of the apology. One is acknowledging the offense, and that's the biggest one that's failed. The second one is the explanation that's offered. The third part of the apology is the expression of remorse and humility and shame, and the fourth one is the reparation. The first one is the one that's mostly flawed, and I'll spend some time on that because some of the examples are really terrifically terrible. When Janet Jackson at the Super Bowl, she never acknowledged what she did. She said, "I'm sorry if I offended anybody." She never said, "What I did was in bad taste, what I did was inappropriate." Never acknowledged it. Schwarzenegger, when he ran for governor, he was accused of inappropriate sexual behavior. He said, when asked whether he had touched women in a sexual manner, he said, quote, "A lot of what you see in the stories is not true, but at the same time I have behaved badly sometimes. I've done things which were not right, which I thought was playful, but that's not what I tried to do." This is his struggle to admit what he did, so it's really not a very satisfactory admission. And then another thing you can do is use the passive voice. Presidents, Bush, Clinton, Nixon, and even President Grant, mistakes were made. Who made them? No mention of who made the mistakes, and mistakes were made. And then another one that's very common, the conditional offense. Nixon in his resignation speech, "I regret any injuries that may have been done." He would have been much better. He said, "I have caused damage. I feel bad about it. It was wrong. I will try to make amends." No. "I regret any injuries that may have been done. If some of my judgments are wrong, and some were wrong, they were made in the best interest of the nation." So you just say, what what kind of apology is that? This is one of the worst ones. Jimmy Swaggart, this is on television. He was talking about his opposition to gay marriage. Quote, "I've never seen a man in my life I wanted to marry. If one ever looks at me like that, I'm going to kill him and tell people, and tell God that he died. He just died." In response to a complaint, it was on Canadian TV, he said it was a humorous statement, and quote, here's his apology: "If it's an insult," and I don't think it was, he says, "but if they are offended, then I certainly offer an apology." I mean, that's not an apology, right? Senator Packwood, in response to accusations of sexual misconduct, said, "I apologize for the alleged offenses." Air Canada canceled for this is now minimizing the offense. You don't want to apologize to someone and say, "But it wasn't so bad after all, was it?" Air Canada canceled 46 flights over a 2-day period because of a contract dispute with the pilots. Thousands of passengers were offended. An airline spokeswoman said, "You have to remember that's out of 650 flights. I know a lot of people have been inconvenienced, and we apologize, but it was really minimal." like if one person died on a plane of 500, what's the big deal? It was only one. 499 lived. Then another trick people use. See, people, they apologize because they feel the pressure to. The public is wanting it, but they can't do it. A New York police officer was convicted of ramming a stick into the rectum of a handcuffed Haitian immigrant and thrusting the stick in the man's face. At the trial, he says, "Judge, I'd like to offer an apology." The judge was excited. Something good could happen. He says, "I want to apologize to my parents for embarrassing them." Validating that he never thought this man was human. And then, of course, you can apologize for the wrong offense. Robert McNamara, this is neither Democrat or Republican, it's just, have any of you read his book in 1995 on the Vietnam War? I read it 3 times and I get sick each time I read it. He was trying to explain, he sort of apologized, we were so busy, we had problems all over the world, and what could we do? And that wasn't the issue at all. David Halberstam, he wrote The Best and the Brightest. In truth, McNamara lied and deceived the Senate and the press and the public. He consistently lies to the nation about the levels of increment of troops, but his greatest crime was the crime of silence. He says in this book that he knew the war couldn't be won. He knew the war was wrong. He leaves the cabinet just before Johnson steps down. He said he didn't know whether he was fired in the book. He said, "I don't know whether I was fired or I resigned." This is a brilliant man. And then he goes and he runs the World Bank. When he left to go to the World Bank, there were only 12,000 American soldiers dead and only 1 million Vietnamese dead. The war is over now. There are 58,000 Americans dead and 3 million Vietnamese dead. And all during that time, when he knew the war couldn't be done, he never said a word. And that's what his greatest crime was, the crime of silence. And that's why I think he's running around the world trying to get other people to say they did it. I think this is a man of conscience. I think he violated his conscience. And finally, you know, the president of Harvard, President Summers. I've been analyzing that, and I want to give you my own opinion on it. One of the curious things about it is he kept on apologizing, and it was never enough, right? He apologized about 6 times for his comments about women. And I said, why won't people accept it? And I think he was apologizing for the wrong offense. That was just the last straw. But his real offense, as you listen to it, people stopped asking about his feelings about women, and that comment, people changed the subject to how he humiliates people all the time. And that's a worse crime. That's a more global crime. Someone said, one of the faculty, women faculty, "Every time, Mr. President, you show a lack of respect for a faculty member's intellectual expertise, you break the culture of a great university. Every time you humiliate or silence a faculty member, you break these ties." And I think humiliation is such a terrible thing. I think that's what people were really responding to, and that was just the last straw, his comment there. To humiliate somebody, I've studied humiliation for the last 20 years. It's the most underestimated important idea in how people get along. Thomas Friedman in the New York Times comments on it frequently. The worst thing you can do between countries is humiliate them. To humiliate someone is to lower them, to treat them badly, to make them feel powerless. What are the synonyms for humiliation? I was insulted, hurt, whipped, eviscerated, nailed to the cross, drawn and quartered, assassinated. To humiliate someone is to destroy their very sense of self. And when someone's humiliated, what's the worst thing they do? They kill the other person. Or absent that, they hold a grudge for life. Because humiliation is really attacking your very sense of who you are, your very being. And I think everybody has a relative who's a chronic humiliator. And it's just the most awful thing. That leads to almost, if you get really angry at somebody because someone attacked your sense of yourself, which basically was a humiliation. Anytime you get really ripped at someone, you ask yourself, what was the antecedent event? You'll see it was an attack on yourself. The only way to respond to people like that actually is to have a comeback. Usually, you're kind of caught off guard. I had a boss one time who would humiliate me because I was the chair of psychiatry. He said, "Oh, here comes a psychiatrist. I don't believe in psychiatry. Don't trust psychiatrists." What's going on? He said, "What do we need to work in a place like this before?" And then I started studying this, and I got something good out of it. And so one day I walked into his office, and there were 15 other chairs of departments, and I went, "Oh, here comes my chair of psychiatry," and he goes on like that, and I said, "Dr. Smith, how long have you felt this way?" He totally unraveled. He never did it again. Because what a chronic humiliator wants to do is to put you off balance and put you on the defensive. And so if you know any chronic humiliators, the only thing you can do is be ready in advance. And having humiliated someone inadvertently, your only cure for that is the apology, just like mine was to this famous professor in cancer that I insulted. That's the structure of apology. I'll just briefly. The structure of apology is different from the. I talked about the first part of the structure is the confession, the acknowledgement. The second part is the explanation. Some explanations are good and some are terrible. Terrible explanation is the devil made me do it. I was drinking. Sometimes it's good to have no explanation, just to say there is just no excuse for what I did. I have no excuse. Sometimes there's more dignity in that. Then the third part, you have to express some embarrassment, shame, or humility. I'll give you an example that you probably know about, the lack of humility. Do you remember the famous professor, a Pulitzer Prize winner at Holyoke, who was teaching his students about the Vietnam War?
Yeah, Ellis.
He was in
His name was Ellis.
That's right,
Yeah.
and he just has a very excellent book apparently on George Washington.
Right. Right around the corner.
Right there. So he's telling his students about his exploits in the Vietnam War, but he wasn't in the war. So he was lying. History professor, no professor is supposed to lie, but worse, a history professor. So his lawyer agent makes an apology. Again, you got to do it yourself, face to face. He didn't do that. And so the apology goes, I regret doing this, and it was wrong of me to do that. And the last line, but these things happen to the best of people. Best of people. So he couldn't tolerate the humiliation one had to bear. And then he wrote another apology. At the end of it, he said, "And so I'm going off on a sabbatical to write another book." And I remember my feeling. I said, "God, I don't tell lies, and I don't get these sabbaticals where I can go off for a year." He's getting rewarded for all of this stuff. And then finally, the reparation. How do I make it up to you? It could be, let me take you for a drink, for dinner, get you flowers, give you $12 million. What was the beginning of the reparation by Kobe Bryant to his wife? Do you remember?
Ring.
Big diamond ring.
Ring.
I think $4 million worth. I wonder whether she went off and sold it right away. That was just the beginning of it. So there are all kind of reparations that people have to make. So that's the structure. The function of the apology was different. The function, if I apologize to you and you say, "That really felt right, I can forgive," what was it that happened? And so I studied all these apologies, and shown that there's many things that can happen. There's not one, but the most common one is the restoration of dignity. It made me feel like a jerk, stupid. He's restored me. But there are other things. For instance, when you with the Catholic priest thing, or if a woman is raped, just tell me it wasn't my fault. There's a validation. It wasn't my fault. It was someone else's fault. That's a different dynamic. Or in some apologies, you have to suffer as much as I do, and I'm going to torture you just a little bit, and or a lot. And so the time goes on before you feel things have evened out. I'll tell you a trivial but funny story. I worked with two wonderful young women. I think they're one's in their 40s, one in their early 50s, and they are just terrific. And one day, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they said, "Aaron, we're so far behind. How about we all come in an hour early and we'll get this work done?" I said, "Oh, nice of them to volunteer to do that," I thought. So I get home and guess who forgot? Me. And I come in an hour later, and they were already there, and I popping in and I say, "Good morning, how are you?" No answer. Their back is turned to me. You know, I'm the boss and I could have it fit. That's not the kind of relationship we have. So finally they tell me what I did wrong, and oh, I really feel mortified. So I made a great apology. Nothing. No response. So then I thought, well, I'll try to bribe them. How about if I take you to lunch today and, sort of make it up? No, it's just going to make things worse. We're so far behind. I tried all kinds of things. What is it that, how did it affect you? Well, we missed our yoga lesson this morning. Oh, God. And then about 10:30 in the morning, one looks at the other one, smiles, and said, "I think he suffered enough." It was, but that's really part of apologies. If you're hurt and the other person comes to you and says, "I realized I hurt. I really feel badly about it," you're still hurting, and which gets to another point, that an apology is a negotiation. It's not what I do to you. An apology is a negotiation. We got to work it out. How specific does the acknowledgement have to be? How does the reparation? Do I have to give you a $4 million ring, or will the dinner do? What about the timing? And so an apology is really a negotiation between two people. One guy at the end, some physician in an audience said, "Dr. Lazare, I have this wonderful fiancé and I really screwed it up and I apologize and nothing works. Tell me what to do." This was the end of a long morning. I had about 30 seconds left. I said, "The negotiations have just begun. Don't lose, and don't lose heart." And that happens between countries too. When the United States plane, the reconnaissance plane, collided with the Chinese jet. The Chinese jet went down and the guy died. Our reconnaissance plane went down. They confiscated the plane and held our people prisoners. We wanted the plane back. They wanted a profound apology. We negotiated the apology. And finally we said, "We'll say we're sorry," and they said, "Not good enough," and we said, "We'll say we're very, very sorry," and the deal was struck, and people suspect we promised also to help them get into the Olympics for 2008 too. There was some side deals, but this is the nature of apologies, both public and private, which is good to know. It's not a unilateral thing. Should we stop the questions?
We should open it up to questions.
Okay, I'll just tell you one more cute story about how important it is to acknowledge the offense. I'm wrestling with my 7-year-old grandson. Wrestling, and he's pounding on me, walking all over me. And I see on the coffee table a can of instant whipped cream. Pick up the whipped cream, squirt it on his cheek. He tries to get out of the way, but I got him. And he starts to scream, "Gabriel, I'm so sorry. I didn't acknowledge the offense. Gabriel, I'm so sorry. Do you forgive me?" He says, "No, Pop-Pop, it's too late to forgive." So I was bewildered. Thought he would like it. So I go into my office, he follows me in, he's playing on the floor. Half hour later I say, "Gabriel, I'm so sorry I squirted you with the whipped cream." And he says, "Pop-Pop, I love the whipped cream. I bumped my head." Gotta know what you're apologizing for. So now I know what to do. You always rub his head and you kiss it. That's what I did. Imagine what he thought when he bumped his head and I didn't even know what I did, and I didn't do it. So he's smiling. I said, Gabriel, you forgive me? He says, yes, Papa, I forgive you because you kissed my head and because I know you're going to make me pancakes for breakfast tomorrow morning. He already had the reparations. Let's stop the question. Yes.
Do you consider the request for forgiveness part of the reparations? Because you've mentioned the term forgiveness, but it's not one of the four pieces of an apology that we outline.
I think that in order...
And, I'm sorry, does an apology fall short if one doesn't ask or offer forgiveness?
I don't think you have to ask. Sometimes when you ask for forgiveness, it has a demanding quality. I beg your forgiveness, and I know if I'm at the end of it, I feel like saying, well, let me hear the apology first. I think that if you make a really good apology, the forgiveness you don't even have to work at. It's like the pus goes out of the wound. Like this man forgave me. I didn't say, I come here to ask for your forgiveness. If I said that, he'd say, for what? I didn't hear the apology yet. So, but I think a good apology leads to spontaneous forgiveness. And I think just thinking about forgiveness independently of the apology, Mrs. DeVoe, I think these things are inextricably bound. Yes.
Earlier you said something about seeing apology occur more frequently in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I think it's the, I think the primary reason is the world being a global village and modern technology, and the world being crowded. All these things lead to more interchanges, and there's more at stake all the time. That's the public apologies. You can only infer that maybe that kind of creeps over into the personal, that maybe there's some connection. There's no way of measuring that. But I think that's the predominant reason, yes.
Is the extent of the offense make the apology harder? I mean, if the perpetrators survived 9/11, their apology to America would be very hard to accept, or the Holocaust, Germany to the victims. I mean, so if you have a really catastrophic offense, do you think an apology really is going to do any good?
Well, take the Holocaust. How can it do any good? Well, they made reparations of about $70 billion to help the state of Israel get off the ground. You can never undo a murder. Someone murders someone else, you can never undo it. But there is some relief from the apology. Even in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I remember reading a story of a man. He didn't even quite apologize. He just acknowledged what he did to a woman, how he tortured and murdered her husband. And she said afterwards, the fact that he could describe what happened to my husband when before there was only a mystery, just knowing what the truth was, meant a great deal to me. I can now bury him and grieve him. So even though you don't have to go to a Holocaust, you can go to one murder, and still there is some good that can come out of the apology, even though you can't make it whole again, you can't restore it.
What can you say about a person who is unable to apologize, even for the most minor?
Yeah.
What's that about?
I've asked about 100 people, why is it so hard to apologize? One reason is then they may find out what I did and I'll be in bigger trouble, but that's more like children's stuff. But they'll say to apologize is to admit I'm weak. To apologize is to take the shield of armor off and to make me vulnerable. I think it's somewhat irrational, but it's very common and very understandable. On the other hand, you'll say, why do people apologize? And it's almost the same thing on the other side. If I apologize, my guilt will diminish. My shame over my failures is better, and maybe I'll even prevent you from attacking me if I can make it up to you. So almost the same reasons why people do apologize are the same reasons why people don't apologize. But the power of resistance to it is really strong, and that's why so many apologies are phony apologies, because I can't quite bring myself to make myself that vulnerable. I see apologies as a sign of strength, but most people see it as a sign of weakness that they're unable to acknowledge. I'm trying to, one of the purposes of the book is that, if I could move the the culture, you know, an eighth of an inch towards feeling like what I say in the last line of the book, that an apology is a sign of generosity, of courage, and of strength. I think it's going to be a better world. Not to be able to apologize is to say, let's have a duel, and whoever dies is the loser. You know, it's not a good way to live on this on this earth. Yes.
When you told the story about the professor who was waiting for you to finish, and you didn't apologize to him right then.
Yes.
And my thought was, oh, I probably would have said, oh, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
Yes.
And I thought, well, maybe that's a woman's way of dealing with it. But I wonder why you didn't say that immediately rather than letting
now
the professor.
you're getting to where it hurts. I want to say, why did I not do that? Now, that there is such a thing. Well, I have one a little bit of a comeback. So I should have done it, at least not right then, maybe an hour later when I saw them. I could have searched them out. Sometimes you can apologize too soon before the person has had a chance to realize how hurt they were, so that if I betrayed your trust, I was bad-mouthing you to other people, and you said, Aaron, such and such is happening, and I said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, got to make it up for you. You say, you don't realize the significance of this, that I'm trying to get off with is too easy. So sometimes you have to apologize in multiple ways. As you think about it, as you think of the way that I betrayed you, it may take you days or weeks or months before you even digest it, until there's a lot of back and forth. So, but there is a thing of apologizing too soon, before the person has really got a chance. Because I may want to apologize before you get angry, and that's not good. I have to let you be angry, and I have to tolerate it, and then say, you know, I deserved all of that. It was really inappropriate of me, or whatever. So it shows you how complex it is. I have a whole chapter on the timing of apologies. The last line of that chapter is, it's never too late to apologize, because of these stories that I have from 50 or 80 or hundreds of years. One of them that's still hanging out is the Armenian. If any of you know someone who's Armenian, they never forget what happened. 1.5 to 2 million Armenians were killed by the Turks. Turks say it never happened. And this will go on for hundreds of years until there's some kind of acknowledgement. You can't, the acknowledgement is so important that in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they didn't demand apologies, they just demanded acknowledgement of what happened. To have acknowledged what happened validates who you are. Worst thing you can say to someone Jewish or Armenian is that never happened. Wait a minute, that's sort of like ready for war, you know. Yes.
Is when someone apologizes, is it important to say I accept your apology, or to acknowledge that? I mean, it sounds like depending on the time it could happen at different intervals, but
You can say you accept the apology just because it's the right thing to say and not really accept it. I think the person can tell, you know. You might, if it's I might say, if you apologize to me, I'd say, you know, I really appreciate what you said. I need to sleep on it a little bit, and then I can go back the next day and say, you know, it took a lot of courage. Or I can say, you know, you apologize for some things, but you left out something that's really, as I thought about it, it's really been eating me up. That's what I call the negotiation.
okay.
And so this guy didn't have to accept it, this 70-year-old man. He just hugged him.
Right.
But you may think it's a good apology, you may feel better, but then a day or two later there's still something that's gnawing at you. And all of that has to get worked out, and then you generally know. You can say I accept it, but I'm not sure people believe it until they feel it viscerally.
I
between
like
the
that
two
you
of them.
said that, but then I want to think about it. 'Cause
Yeah.
sometimes you do feel like it's an automatic response.
Yes.
I accept your apology because they're
You're supposed to say it,
Right.
or I forgive you because you're supposed to say
Right.
that. But I think it's reasonable to say, you know, I do appreciate what you said, but I need a little bit of time. So,
Well, it's also somewhat of an acknowledgement of it being a good one, because you can recognize a good one when you hear it, like
Yeah.
you said. So.
and you express it when you feel you've heard a good one. They really responded to your need. You know, I knew that Gabriel, my grandson, when he said, "Now you're going to make me break," I knew that he accepted my apology. I didn't have to say, "Did you?"
Right.
Yes.
On that same theme, it occurs to me that there may be some people for whom not accepting the apology supports their agenda. It's kind of a manipulative thing. I think of, in domestic abuse kinds of situations or something, or even among nations where
Yeah. So people,
And so the people who are apologizing, who may genuinely feel remorse, are kind of left with that hanging out there.
still not accepting of it. First thing I might say is, I may be missing something. Am I correct in what the offense is? Now, an alternative explanation, supposing I humiliated you, you're sitting, we're together, and you said, Aaron, you apologized to me, but do you realize that it was my best friend and my sister and my mother who were standing there? So I don't realize fully what the offense was. So one thing to do is to say, I apologize to you, and I realize that it's not been satisfactory. Can you help me understand what's missing? And if they say, it just doesn't matter, whatever you do,
Right.
I'll never forgive you, then you're into the bad situation. There's a statement from the Talmud that says, if you apologize 3 times and the person won't accept it, they're the sinner.
That's a solution.